Aftermath of UFC 212, Max Holloway is the new king of the featherweight division. It also marks, as I even titled in an email yesterday, I'm bitter about this one because I like Patrick Wyman.
Pixar didn't happen.
It's the end of Jose Aldo. And say what you will about him, I'm just going to read you the quote from Wyman that I couldn't agree with more, because if you do scream this, you are, quote, a brain-dead moron, and it's true. It wasn't Aldo's most devastating loss, eating a Conor McGregor left hand and going down in 13 seconds after suffering through a year of the Irishman's mass-produced trash talk was worse in imagery and implication, ensuring that no discussion of Aldo's 6-year, 9-fight run as the best featherweight on the planet can take place without some brain-dead moron injecting 13 seconds. Aldo looked great in the first round, and then Aldo got absolutely pummeled by Max Holloway, who is not a featherweight to be messed with, and somebody who should be able to retain his titles, because I don't think the featherweight division's all that deep.
No.
And what we saw from Aldo when he returned against Frankie Edgar was that defensive presence, fighting in the pocket and staying on his back foot opposed to fighting off his front foot, and then he changed again in this fight against Holloway, where he was way more aggressive. But when he gets aggressive, he opens up and he gets beat by Holloway in this sense. It was a 3rd round TKO, but man, stand-up fighting in the UFC is the best. It really is. I have respect for Cormier and how he fights, don't get me wrong, and submission artists like Khabib, but when it comes to the stand-up fights, this is what people want to pay for.
Yeah, when I saw this fight on the card, I was excited regardless. Jose Aldo against Frankie Edgar was a masterclass of what Jose Aldo was great at doing and being a specialist, but he also had that ability to knock people out, and his leg kicks are ferocious. We know that. He's
flying knee.
Yeah, and he was spectacular when he was in his day. I think that it's not just that physically Jose Aldo looked as if he was out of his element in the second, obviously, and then the 3rd round. I think that mentally, that punch from Conor McGregor, I'm not going to attest McGregor to Aldo's demise, but I think mentally it's taken Jose Aldo a lot to come back from, because we saw how he announced that he was going to retire from the UFC and then came back, and I don't think that he's really found his place in the UFC after that fight against McGregor. I think he's tried to understand, going from being one of the most dangerous fighters in the industry to really trying to redefine himself, find his place again. Now, that's not to take away from the lengthy history. If you're coming at this and thinking that I'm saying that Jose Aldo was trying to identify what his style fighter is, no, I'm just trying to say that when you go from being, like we see with Ronda Rousey, at the very top of your game, best in the industry, considered one of the best ever, and then you suddenly fall flat in your face because you go in and you're a little bit rash in an approach, and you've had all those mind games going on between him and McGregor for a while, and then he was embarrassed. It must have been humiliating for him after pulling out of the fight once before and then having to come back, and then McGregor knocking him out so emphatically early on. I think that it really has taken its toll on him. And then when you seen him against Frankie Edgar, you thought, all right, business as usual. He's getting back. He looks as if he's got his head on straight. And then in this fight, again, I think first round he looked good, and then the second and third fight, I think he just tried to overexert himself. And he did. In a way, Holloway took advantage of that.
It was, as a lot of the commentators pointed out during the fight, it was an adjustment. He made an adjustment to simply just throw back, right? So Aldo kept coming towards him. He was aggressive, and he would strike. And what Holloway simply did towards the end of the second round was like, screw it, I'm going to fight you back. Because Holloway was always somebody who never would get, I shouldn't say never get knocked out, but was tough chin. He's got a strong chin. Stronger than that of Aldo, and that has nothing to do with the fight against Conor McGregor. Although it didn't help his case. It's like Amir Khan when he gets knocked out and you're sitting there in boxing.
That was a glass jaw.
And you're sitting there going like, oh, right, it's only one really strong punch to the jaw.
Yeah.
Or right hook in that case, or an uppercut, a lot of which has dropped Amir Khan in the past and in the future, and what will eventually come in the boxing world. But back to the UFC world. He just started throwing back, so he would counter Aldo's counters with combinations.
Yeah.
And it eventually put him on his back and then just flurried on top of him, and that was it. And it was an exciting fight by all means. And one of the things that is interesting going forward is that the Brazilian presence will always be in the UFC, but they are no longer dominant.
Yeah.
And that's just a way that the UFC has evolved and changed. It always goes through phases, don't get me wrong. There will be periods of time where certain styles of fighting will dominate the sport that includes multiple styles of fighting. And what we saw over the last year and a half is just, really 2 years, is the fall of some of the kingpins in this sport that came out of Brazil. And that's fine. It's just one of those things that I find interesting to see change over time. And it's almost like a good time for it to happen, because I don't know how many more fights Anderson Silva has in him. He could lose the next 17 fights in a row. He's the top 3 greatest to ever fight in the octagon for obvious reasons. It's just time.
Yeah, and he doesn't see.
It's funny given their catchphrase of being "it's time."
Yeah, it's true. The way he is approaching it, it doesn't seem like he's wanting to slow down. He was complaining about not being given Anderson Silva. He was complaining about not having the title shot that GSP was going to get, and I was like, you want to see.
I want Silva to fight McGregor.
You want to see some of the best go out on the best note. But you're right. I mean, at one point you're looking at Anderson Silva, you're looking at Jose Aldo, you're looking at Rafael dos Anjos. I mean, Amanda Nunes is the one that's flying the flag for Brazil, more so than anyone else, of course, being at the top of her game. But it's just, I don't know if it's a testament to other fighters like kind of redefining the way the sport's going. I think that it is time. I think that it's just, these guys are getting older, and younger fighters are coming forth that are really taking a grasp to it.
Michael Bisping, who he's like, what do you call Andre Pierre? He's like fine wine. He ages well.
Ages well. He's been in the industry for like how many?
Bisping has like 20 fights under his name, and then he became a champion, which is rare. But the one thing I wanted to mention too, Francis, was Demetrious Johnson and Dana White, because what Dana White's doing to him in terms of the UFC is very unfair, and we don't cover enough Demetrious Johnson. Nobody covers enough Demetrious Johnson. As it is, he's one of their best champions to ever exist, and pound for pound the best fighter in the sport. It's just wrong to overlook it. Dana White is going to force him to fight TJ Dillashaw after Cody Garbrandt, who is the youngest rising star in the entire UFC, is out due to injury. So TJ Dillashaw has to drop weight, but Demetrious Johnson doesn't want this. And you would think the pound for pound best fighter in the UFC, who is is 1 fight away from breaking Anderson Silva's record of title defenses, who has built the flyweight division. They created it partially for him. Dana White threatened to take it away, which is so petty. After telling Dana my reasons, Dana angrily told me that I am fighting TJ once again with no other option or say in my career, and against the plans we had previously laid out. He went on to further say that if I didn't take the fight against TJ and drop Borg as the opponent, he would get rid of the entire flyweight division. He said, this is for TJ, and I'm taking away TJ's opportunity. The fact that he feels what I should do in my career is for TJ telling me where his priority lies. They've never been fair to Demetrious Johnson, and we understand where Dana White comes from in all of these ways. It doesn't mean we can't call him petty and immature and a terrible way of treating your employees, because that's what it is, and we know where Dana White's priorities are. But if you're going to cut anybody slack in the UFC, the guy that you sham from pay-per-view cards, he gets less money no matter what, because he's not on pay-per-view cards, he's on UFC on Fox cards most of the time, is a disservice to Mighty Mouse. And I know, he's not as exciting, he's not as fun, oh my God, he's not as polarizing, he's too nice, all these things.
But it's like, you're almost taking advantage of his loyalty. You know, like, yeah, I get it. The flyweight division is not jam-packed with superstars talent.
Because he's so good.
Yeah, and that's probably a testament to how good he is. You can't punish the guy for doing so. And I get, you always try to understand where Dana White's coming from, because he's a very successful business owner in the way that he runs UFC, and he looks to try and put on stacked cards. But you also need to pay respect to just the continuous, rigorous professionalism that has came forward from Demetrious Johnson. Doesn't get involved in any shite outside the octagon. He's not out there hitting runs. He's not out there failing tests. You know,
he's a good role model for the UFC, for a sport that's involved in fighting. He's the person you want people to look up to.
And if there's anyone that you should be cutting some slack for, and not threatening. Like, there's a way you can do it, but it's almost like you posed it as a threat. It's like, well, I'll take it away from you, and you're like, I get if you're saying this to John Jones or something like that, but you're saying it to Demetrious Johnson.
I'll tell you what, Dana White versus Demetrious Johnson, winner gets to keep the division.
Winner gets to control the whole thing. And then we'll see who's on the pay-per-view card.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Dana White.
Dana White. UFC 300, Dana White versus Demetrious Johnson. All right, comment below. UFC 213 is next. 214 involves Jones and Cormier, if it happens.
Touch wood.
At some point, man, they really need They need Conor McGregor back in that octagon badly. It's true, but they need it.